February 12, 1943. Luftwaffe Base Morozovskaya, 40 kilometers west of Rostov-on-Don. Oberst Heinrich Müller stood before his assembled fighter squadron commanders in the briefing room that still smelled of burned coffee and yesterday's cigarette smoke. Outside, ground crews worked under floodlights repairing damage from the previous night's raid. The third consecutive night, Soviet bombers had destroyed fuel stores and ammunition depots. Müller's face bore the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. His pilots looked worse. "Gentlemen," he began, spreading reconnaissance photographs across the table, "I've identified our tormentors." "Women," Hauptmann Friedrich Weber said, examining the grainy images of canvas-covered biplanes. "They're sending women in crop dusters." Laughter erupted around the table. "Training aircraft from 1928, another officer added, holding up a technical specification sheet. "Wood and canvas. No radios, no parachutes, maximum speed 94 miles per hour. These are the aircraft disrupting the entire southern front?" Weber raised his glass of schnapps. "To the Nachthexen, the night witches, may they provide us easy victories and iron crosses." More laughter. Müller permitted himself a rare smile. "Intelligence confirms approximately 40 pilots total. Simple mathematics, gentlemen. We have 250 fighters at this airfield alone. Within 1 week, this problem ceases to exist." Confident nods circled the room. Someone made a joke about shooting down wooden toys. The meeting adjourned with unprecedented optimism. What Oberst Müller didn't know was that at that precise moment, 22-year-old Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova was already airborne 12 kilometers from his position, preparing for her 6th sortie of the night. She would complete 12 more before dawn, 18 missions total in a single night, a feat she would repeat dozens of times during her career. Born in Yeysk to a railroad administrator's family, Popova had joined the all-female 588th Night Bomber Regiment with singular motivation. German forces had executed her brother and burned her hometown. Her Polikarpov Po-2 biplane carried exactly 40 kilograms of bombs beneath its wings. She had already dropped 240 kilograms on German positions that night. By morning, she would deliver 480 kilograms more. 36 hours after Müller's confident briefing, his ammunition depot exploded in a chain reaction that consumed 17% of the base's ordnance reserves. Popova had flown directly over the meeting where officers mocked her existence, invisible in darkness, while they drank and laughed below. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, represented the accumulated lessons of thousands of combat deaths transformed into engineering requirements. After the Battle of Britain, where 42 German pilots froze to death in open cockpits during extended night patrols, Luftwaffe High Command mandated enclosed heated crew compartments for all night fighters. When 17 bomber collisions occurred during darkness operations over England in 1940, radio communication became non-negotiable, enabling coordination between aircraft and ground controllers. Analysis of casualty reports revealed that 30% of fatal accidents resulted from pilots unable to escape damaged aircraft, establishing parachutes as mandatory equipment. The speed minimum of 180 miles per hour emerged after multiple incidents where slower aircraft became easy targets for British night fighters, their lack of velocity preventing evasive maneuvers. Every specification existed for documented reasons, written in German blood. The Junkers Ju-88 embodied these requirements perfectly. Cruising speed of 300 miles per hour, crew of 4 specialists including dedicated radar operator, FUG-220 Liechtenstein radar detecting targets at 4 kilometers, twin BMW 801 engines generating 2,400 combined horsepower. Between 1940 and 1942, Ju-88 night fighters destroyed 357 British bombers, establishing the aircraft as the definitive standard for nocturnal air superiority. German confidence wasn't arrogance. It was earned through systematic victories against the Royal Air Force's most advanced bombers. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant. On November 8, 1942, she approached a Wehrmacht supply convoy near Krimskaya with no radio contact. Her navigator Katya Ryabova communicated via hand signals in the darkness. No parachute, flying at 94 miles per hour in a wooden aircraft held together with fabric and wire. Anti-aircraft fire erupted, tracer rounds illuminating her biplane's canvas skin. She continued straight through the barrage, released her bombs directly onto the convoy's fuel trucks, then banked so sharply her wingtip nearly touched treetops. The convoy exploded. 3 supply trucks incinerated. Popova climbed back to altitude with 12 bullet holes in her aircraft's wings and fuselage, none striking anything vital because there was nothing vital to strike. No hydraulics, no fuel lines running through wings, no complex systems. This was mission 47 of what would eventually become 852, a number that would make her one of the most decorated Soviet pilots of the entire war. German after-action reports from that night recorded unexplained losses and attributed them to possible partisan sabotage, unable to accept that a woman in a crop duster had penetrated their defenses and vanished like smoke. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established. The Polikarpov PO-2 represented aviation primitivism taken to absurd extremes. Constructed entirely from wood and canvas, it earned nicknames like Flying Kindling and Plywood Coffin, though pilots preferred the term sewing machine for its distinctive engine sound. Open cockpit design exposed pilots to Siberian winter conditions, temperatures regularly dropping to -40 degrees Celsius, causing severe frostbite on faces and hands. Pilots wrapped their faces in cloth, but their breath froze on their eyelashes, temporarily blinding them during critical moments. No equipment whatsoever. No radios meant hand signals and prearranged flight patterns. No parachutes because the aircraft operated at altitudes where parachutes couldn't deploy before ground impact. No armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no oxygen systems. Pilots sat completely exposed to enemy fire, weather, and the void. Technical specifications revealed the aircraft's obsolescence. Maximum speed 94 miles per hour, half the German minimum operational threshold. Single M11 5-cylinder radial engine producing 100 horsepower, compared to the Ju-88's 2400. Designed in 1928 for agricultural training, the PO-2 was literally older than most pilots flying it. Manufacturing cost approximately $5,000 versus the Ju-88's $80,000. Production time 3 weeks versus 3 months. The concept itself seemed suicidal. Young women flying wooden trainers converted to bombers, hand-dropping explosives while exposed to anti-aircraft fire and fighter interception. German intelligence analysts viewing these specifications concluded the Soviet Union had exhausted both aircraft and pilots. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into tactical advantages. The PO-2's extreme simplicity enabled impossible operational tempo. On March 3, 1943, Popova flew 18 missions in one night, a record demonstrating how the aircraft's primitive design became a weapon. Refueling required 4 minutes, reloading bombs 3 minutes, basic mechanical check 2 minutes. Total turnaround, 9 minutes. A Ju-88 required 45 minutes minimum for similar procedures due to complex systems, multiple fuel tanks, sophisticated bomb loading mechanisms. Popova took off, flew 12 kilometers to target, dropped bombs, returned to base, landed, and repeated the cycle before German bombers completed pre-flight checks. During one sortie that night, her aircraft absorbed 24 bullet holes from ground fire. She landed, ground crew hammered wooden patches over the larger holes, stretched fabric over the rest, applied glue, and she took off again 17 minutes later. If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, she later recounted, that bullet would have ricocheted inside until it found me or something important. Canvas doesn't ricochet. Bullets pass through like throwing rocks through cheesecloth. Germans designed aircraft to fight their war, enclosed, protected, systematic. We designed tactics to fight ours, fast, expendable, relentless. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment dated January 15, 1943, from the Reichsluftfahrtministerium concluded, Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents desperate measure indicating severe pilot shortage and declining manufacturing capacity. Analysis confirms wooden construction and primitive equipment render these aircraft extremely vulnerable to modern fighter interception and ground fire. Basic physics remains immutable. Speed, metal construction, and modern technology invariably defeat slow, wooden, obsolete designs. Current operational capability assessed as temporary phenomenon. Predict operations cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. Calculated advantages favor German forces. 3.2 to 1 speed ratio, 24 to 1 horsepower differential, 15 to 1 cost efficiency, suggesting Soviet desperation rather than tactical innovation. Assess threat as limited to temporary morale, impact through sleep disruption. No serious operational threat to strategic infrastructure or frontline positions. Recommendation: monitor situation but do not prioritize development of specialized countermeasures. Existing night fighter capabilities deemed more than sufficient. Soviet female pilot program represents propaganda value exceeding military significance. This assessment carried the full authority of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers and represented consensus from officers who had destroyed hundreds of British bombers. It was comprehensively wrong. While German high command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. On January 22, 1943, 1 week after the assessment's publication, she destroyed an ammunition train near Taman Peninsula during her 9th mission of that night. The explosion so massive it registered on seismographs 30 kilometers away. German logistics officers recorded the loss as catastrophic, unable to explain how obsolete aircraft penetrated layered defenses. By this point, Popova had conducted over 200 missions, rapidly approaching the 852 that would eventually place her among the Soviet Union's most decorated aviators. Intelligence reports noted unexplainable supply losses, contradicting the technical assessment. But senior officers attributed discrepancies to partisan activity or poor German record-keeping, rather than questioning their aeronautical experts' conclusions. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their mathematical logic appeared sound. Ju-88 cruising at 300 miles per hour versus PO2 maximum speed 94 miles per hour equals 3.2 times speed advantage. Basic physics suggested easy interception and destruction. Faster aircraft always catches slower aircraft. Except they critically overlooked one aerodynamic reality. Successful interception requires matching target speed, not merely exceeding it. The stall speed paradox destroyed German confidence. Ju-88 night fighters stalled at approximately 120 miles per hour. Below that threshold, insufficient airflow over wings caused catastrophic loss of lift, and the aircraft dropped from the sky. Po-2 operated comfortably at 80 miles per hour, could glide at 60 miles per hour with engine cut completely. The Soviet biplane flew below German minimum survivable speed. This created an impossible combat scenario. German pilots approaching at interception speed overshot targets too quickly to aim and fire effectively, or they reduced velocity to engage and immediately encountered stall warnings forcing abort or crash. No middle ground existed in the physics. September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad, Hauptmann Werner Schmidt attempted engagement with a PO2 at dawn. Schmidt reduced his Ju-88 to 130 miles per hour, lining up his approach. The Soviet pilot, detecting the fighter through sound alone, immediately throttled back to 70 miles per hour, gliding descent. Schmidt's aircraft began shaking, stall warning klaxon shrieking in his headset, wings losing lift. He firewalled throttles and climbed away, aborting the engagement. His after-action report stated simply, target speed below minimum engagement threshold. Interception impossible without controlled flight into terrain. Understanding this, physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable. During her record 18 missions on March 3, 1943, she encountered a German night fighter during her 14th sortie. She heard the Ju-88's engines, a distinctive roar compared to her sewing machine rattle, cut her throttle completely, and descended to minimum altitude. The German made 4 passes, overshooting catastrophically each time, unable to slow enough to track her without stalling. On his final attempt, desperate to score a kill, the pilot reduced to near stall speed, his aircraft wobbling, wings shaking, hemorrhaging altitude. He abandoned pursuit or faced certain death. Popova completed her mission, returned to base, and took off for her 15th sortie 23 minutes later. This tactic, repeated across hundreds of her eventual 852 missions, proved the POW-2's slowness was its greatest defensive weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed. And Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated Hauptmann Schmidt was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. German fighters were optimized for intercepting fast Soviet bombers, the Ilyushin Il-4 and Petlyakov P-2, aircraft cruising at 250 miles per hour or faster. The Ju-88 and Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighters were designed to chase these targets, engines roaring, radar operators calling vectors, pilots pushing throttles forward. Physics dictated their engagement parameters. Any aircraft must maintain minimum speed or surrender lift and fall from the sky. A Ju-88 cruising at 300 miles per hour approaching a target inevitably overshot, the closure rate too rapid for weapons lock. Reducing speed to 150 miles per hour brought dangerous proximity to the stall threshold of 120, where wings lost aerodynamic efficiency and the aircraft hemorrhaged altitude. The POW-2 operating at 80 miles per hour, capable of gliding at 60 with engine completely idle, existed in an untouchable velocity zone below German engagement parameters. Luftwaffe pilots trained for pursuit tactics, high-speed intercepts where success depended on matching velocity and trajectory, not precision slow-speed engagement against targets that could decelerate below their minimum survivable speed. Target acquisition at high differential speeds offered approximately 2 to 3 seconds for weapons lock. At closing rates exceeding 200 miles per hour, establishing firing solution became mathematically impossible before overshooting the target and beginning the frustrating cycle again. On April 17, 1943, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage on her 218th mission, approaching a Wehrmacht ammunition depot near Temryuk. She detected the German fighter by its engine sound, a distinct mechanical roar cutting through the darkness, and immediately throttled her M11 engine to minimum power, descending to 70 miles per hour. The Bf-110 made 4 passes, each time screaming past her at speeds that made accurate fire impossible. The pilot's frustration visible in his aggressive banking maneuvers trying to circle back for another attempt. Each pass gave Popova additional time to adjust her course toward the target, calmly navigating while her pursuer burned fuel in increasingly desperate interception attempts. She completed her bombing run while the German fighter, having exhausted ammunition and fuel attempting to engage a target that refused to cooperate with his training, returned to base and filed a report noting target evasion successful through unconventional low-speed tactics. This tactic, perfected over what would eventually become 852 missions, transformed the POW-2's limited speed from vulnerability into primary defense mechanism. By this point, mission 218 of her eventual total, Popova had survived more intercept attempts than most German pilots had flown sorties. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the POW-2's greatest vulnerability, its construction from wood and canvas rather than metal. German aeronautical engineers understood bullet physics intimately. When ammunition struck aluminum fuselage, the projectile penetrated the metal skin, created shrapnel from the torn material, then ricocheted inside the enclosed space, striking fuel lines, hydraulic systems, control cables, crew members. German ammunition was specifically designed for metal targets, incorporating explosive rounds that detonated on impact and incendiary tracers that ignited flammable materials. Armor-piercing rounds wasted tremendous kinetic energy penetrating armor plating that didn't exist on wooden aircraft. Canvas presented entirely different physics. Bullets passed through fabric, exited cleanly, transferred minimal energy, generated no shrapnel, caused no secondary damage. Wood frames absorbed bullets by creating clean holes unless the projectile directly struck a structural spar. Vital systems, engine, fuel tank, crew, occupied perhaps 15% of the aircraft's total volume, the remaining 85% essentially empty space surrounded by canvas that bullets treated as non-existent. Canvas tears didn't significantly affect aerodynamic properties until damage became catastrophic. Repairs consisted of canvas patches applied in 30 minutes versus metal aircraft requiring welding operations consuming hours. German pilots repeatedly reported hits without kills, their after-action statements noting with confusion that bullets pass through without observable effect. Target continues flight. During her 309th mission on July 8, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively while attacking a supply convoy near Novorossiysk. German ground forces, increasingly proficient at targeting night witches, concentrated fire on her approach. She continued straight through the barrage, released her bombs directly onto the convoy's fuel trucks, then banked sharply away. Ground crew inspection the following morning counted 42 bullet holes, 27 in the upper wing alone, 8 in the fuselage, 7 in the tail assembly. Bullets had passed through canvas on both sides of the cockpit, one projectile entering 12 inches from her left shoulder and exiting 18 inches past her right arm. The holes formed a constellation of near misses, any one of which would have killed her had she been flying an enclosed metal aircraft where ricochets were inevitable. Ground crew patched the larger holes with canvas sections, stretched fabric over smaller punctures, applied glue, and declared the aircraft airworthy. She flew 3 more missions that night in the same damaged PO2, the fabric patches fluttering slightly but holding. This particular aircraft would carry her through 50 additional missions before being retired from service. "In their metal planes, I would be dead," she told her navigator while examining the holes. Germans designed their aircraft to protect against the weapons they feared. We learned that protection sometimes means giving bullets nothing to hit. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale: the silent gliding approach that transformed night witches into genuine spectral threats. German searchlight and anti-aircraft artillery systems relied fundamentally on acoustic detection, sound-ranging equipment that triangulated engine noise for targeting coordinates. Standard defensive procedure followed predictable sequence. Acoustic sensors detected approaching engines. Searchlights activated to illuminate targets. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Fighter squadrons scrambled for interception. The night witches discovered, possibly through accidental engine failure that forced improvisation, a tactic that defeated this entire defensive chain. They approached targets at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, allowing Germans to hear them clearly and prepare defenses. At approximately 3,000 feet altitude, pilots cut engines completely, transitioning to silent glides lasting 5 to 6 minutes. They dropped bombs before Germans realized aircraft were directly overhead, often restarting engines only after explosions illuminated the ground below. Physics enabled this tactic. The PO2's glide ratio of approximately 1 to 10 meant losing 1 foot of altitude for every 10 feet of forward travel. From 3,000 feet, that ratio produced 30,000 feet of gliding distance, equivalent to 5.6 miles. At 60 miles per hour glide speed, that translated to 5.6 minutes of completely silent approach. The only sound was wind through canvas wings, a soft rustling indistinguishable from normal night breezes, nothing resembling engine roar. The psychological effect devastated German soldiers. Hearing engines, preparing weapons, then experiencing absolute silence followed by explosions from an invisible source. On the night of March 3, 1943, during her record 18 missions, Nadezhda Popova used this silent approach 7 times, perfecting the technique through repetition. Her 7th sortie targeted a German command post near Krimskaya, a valuable installation coordinating regional defenses. She approached with engine loud enough for ground forces to hear clearly, watching searchlights sweep the sky attempting to locate her. At 2,800 feet, she cut the engine completely. The PO2 transitioned from powered flight to silent glide, descending gradually through darkness while German soldiers called to each other below, their voices carrying clearly in the still night air. "Where are the planes? The engines stopped. Where did they go?" Searchlights continued sweeping empty sky behind her while she glided silently forward, directly over their positions. She could see their faces when searchlight beams briefly illuminated the ground. Expressions of confusion and growing fear as they realized the sound had vanished, but the threat remained. She dropped bombs on the command post while Germans searched empty sky, the explosions illuminating their upturned faces staring at nothing, trying to comprehend an invisible enemy. She restarted her engine only after clearing the target area, the familiar sewing machine sound resuming as she climbed back to altitude. She would repeat this silent approach dozens of times across her eventual 852 missions, the tactic becoming her signature method. "We were ghosts they couldn't fight," she explained later. "They feared the silence more than the bombs. The bombs they could see coming. The silence meant we were already above them." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality, a truth Wehrmacht logistics officers were documenting with increasing alarm. The Ju-88 night fighter impressed with specifications: cruising speed 300 miles per hour, 2,400 horsepower from twin engines, few G-220 radar detecting targets at 4 kilometers, comprehensive radio systems, armor protection, crew of 4 specialists. Cost and production requirements matched this sophistication. $80,000 per aircraft, 3 months to manufacture, requiring skilled machinists and precision engineering. Operational tempo reflected this complexity. 1 to 2 sorties per night maximum. Pilots and crew requiring rest between high-intensity missions. Maintenance between sorties consumed 3 to 4 hours for comprehensive systems checks, refueling complex internal tank networks, rearming sophisticated weapon systems, allowing crew recuperation from high-stress operations. Crew fatigue accumulated rapidly when 4 men coordinated in enclosed, high-pressure environment. Average Ju-88 night fighter career lasted 40 to 60 missions before aircraft loss, crew rotation, or mechanical failure required replacement. Survival rates hovered around 60%, with substantial losses attributed to weather, navigation errors, and mechanical failures rather than combat. The POW presented inverse statistics across every metric. Specifications appeared primitive. Maximum speed 94 miles per hour, 100 horsepower from single engine, no radar, no radio communication, no armor plating, crew of 2. Cost and production reflected simplicity: $5,000 per aircraft, 3 weeks to manufacture, requiring minimal skilled labor and basic carpentry tools. Operational tempo exploited this simplicity: 8 to 18 sorties per night possible, pilots conducting repeated missions without extended rest. Maintenance between missions totaled 7 minutes, 4 minutes for refueling from simple external tank, 3 minutes for manually loading bombs onto external racks. Crew coordination involved 2 women who had flown together hundreds of times, communication through hand signals and intuitive understanding. Average night witch career encompassed 800 to 1,000 missions over sustained periods. Survival rate reached 96.8%, with losses almost entirely from ground fire rather than fighter interception. The paradox defied conventional wisdom. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft produced lower operational effectiveness, while simpler, cheaper aircraft generated higher operational impact. German advantage in technology became disadvantage in logistics and operational tempo. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record with mathematical precision. On March 3, 1943, during her record 18-mission night, she started operations at 2,200 hours and concluded at 0530 hours, maintaining average cycle time of 25 minutes per complete sortie. Fly to target, conduct bombing run, return to base, refuel, reload bombs, launch again. Ground crew efficiency reached remarkable levels, mechanics preparing her aircraft faster than she could complete debriefing and walk back to the cockpit. Total bombs dropped that night: 720 kilograms across 18 sorties, each carrying 40 kilograms. German positions hit included 2 ammunition dumps, 1 vehicle maintenance facility, 1 communication center, 3 supply convoys, and 11 individual targets of opportunity. German casualties estimated at 143 personnel killed or wounded, with material losses exceeding 2 million Reichsmarks. Compare this to the most accomplished Luftwaffe pilot who flew maximum 4 sorties in exceptional circumstances. By this point in the war, approaching mission 300 with 552 remaining in her future, Popova's 18-mission record was becoming legendary even among German soldiers who monitored Soviet radio transmissions and interrogated prisoners. She represented operational capacity equivalent to multiple entire German fighter squadrons, a single woman in a wooden biplane outperforming dozens of sophisticated metal aircraft. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in their resource allocation reports. German expenditure attempting to counter night witches specifically accumulated to staggering totals. Anti-aircraft ammunition, over 2 million rounds fired at night witches across the southern front, at 50 Reichsmarks per shell, totaling 100 million Reichsmarks, approximately $40 million. Dedicated fighter sorties, more than 1,000 specific intercept attempts against night witches, at 500 Reichsmarks operational cost per sortie, totaling 500,000 Reichsmarks. Searchlight batteries, 200 units deployed exclusively for night harassment defense, each unit costing thousands of Reichsmarks in equipment and maintenance. Personnel assignment, over 5,000 soldiers diverted from frontline duties to counter nocturnal harassment operations. Total German cost exceeded 50 million Reichsmarks attempting to eliminate a threat the Soviets created for under $2 million. Soviet investment in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment remained minimal. 40 PO-2 aircraft at $5,000 each totaled $200,000. Ammunition costs represented a fraction of defensive ammunition expended against them. Personnel numbered 80 pilots and navigators plus minimal ground crew totaling approximately 150 individuals. The cost ratio was devastating. Germans spending 25 times what Soviets invested, achieving 0 confirmed fighter kills against night witches, while the regiment continued operations without interruption. This represented perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain, forcing disproportionate defensive expenditure that weakened German capabilities elsewhere. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in concentrated form. If Germans fired average 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her per mission, her 852 missions eventually totaled 852,000 rounds fired specifically at one woman. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, that calculated to 42 million Reichsmarks, nearly $17 million, spent trying to kill a single Soviet pilot. Result, she survived every attempt. Her bombs destroyed estimated values exceeding 100 million Reichsmarks in German material, ammunition stores, vehicles, communication equipment, fuel depots, infrastructure. Compare this to average United States Army Air Force bomber crews rotating home after 25 missions. Popova completed equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty, more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters accumulated in their operational lifespans. She represented one of the most cost-effective weapons in Soviet arsenal, return on investment that no conventional military system could match. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets. And Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation. October 17, 1942, near Maikop in the Kuban region, Wehrmacht forces overran a Soviet airfield during a rapid armored advance, capturing the position before defenders could complete evacuation procedures. German intelligence officers searching abandoned structures found documents left behind in the chaos. Flight rosters, personnel records, mission logs. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, assigned to document captured materials, examined the first roster with routine disinterest until specific names registered. Not the masculine surnames he expected, Ivanov, Petrov, Volkov, but unmistakably feminine names, Popova, Ruskova, Mechlin, Bershanskaya. He cross-referenced with personnel records, birth dates indicating ages between 18 and 23. Gender markers clearly listed as female. Awards, citations mentioning pilot-navigator pairs with feminine grammatical forms throughout Russian text. Richter's initial assumption, clerical error or Soviet propaganda documents intentionally left for German discovery. He cross-referenced names with captured mission logs spanning 6 months. Same names appeared repeatedly across hundreds of documented sorties. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova, 319 missions recorded. Navigator Katya Ryabova, 319 missions, identical dates. The pattern repeated across 40 personnel files. These weren't instructors or ferry pilots. These were combat pilots conducting nightly operations. Richter's report, sent up the chain of command marked urgent, requires immediate verification, included one phrase that would circulate through Wehrmacht headquarters for weeks. Enemy harassment forces consist primarily or entirely of female combat personnel. Recommend immediate verification through alternative intelligence sources. The report reached Battalion Commander Oberst Werner Hoffmann, who dismissed it as obvious disinformation. Multiple confirmations arrived that same week from separate sectors. A downed PO-2 near Armavir. Pilot's body recovered, unmistakably female. Logbook showing 274 missions. Another crashed aircraft near Temriuk. 2 female crew members killed. Documents confirming 588th Night Bomber Regiment assignment. Report escalated to Division, then Corps, then Army Group. Each command level exhibited identical pattern. Initial disbelief, demand for verification, reluctant acceptance when evidence accumulated. Wehrmacht intelligence conducted comprehensive investigation. Confirmed. 588th Night Bomber Regiment, designated all-female unit, operational since May 1942, under Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya. High Command briefing convened November 1942. General Friedrich Paulus, commanding 6th Army, presented findings to assembled senior officers. Conference room filled with colonels and generals confronted with photographic evidence, captured documents, cross-referenced raid reports. Intelligence analysts demonstrated same aircraft serial numbers appearing in multiple attack reports spanning months. PO-2 number 23 documented attacking 17 different targets across 4 months. Cross-reference with Night Witch operational patterns confirmed consistency. Conclusion unavoidable. Women were responsible for harassment operations that had cost millions in resources, disrupted sleep for thousands of soldiers, destroyed substantial material. The revelation created crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that transcended simple military assessment. Disbelief persisted among many officers who refused acceptance, demanding additional proof beyond what intelligence provided. Humiliation cut deeper. Elite Luftwaffe pilots, veterans of campaigns across Europe, had been systematically defeated by women flying agricultural training aircraft. The propaganda problem proved insurmountable. How to explain this to German public and troops without devastating morale? Ideological conflict emerged immediately. Nazi doctrine explicitly defined women's proper roles: childbearing, homemaking, supporting male warriors, yet operational reality demonstrated Soviet women conducting complex military operations more effectively than German men could counter them. The practical concern haunted strategic planning. If German intelligence had been this fundamentally wrong about Soviet capabilities, what other assumptions were equally flawed? Luftwaffe pilots began requesting transfers rather than continue operations where they might encounter night witches, unable to face professional humiliation. Some officers insisted on bureaucratic resistance, referring to them exclusively as Soviet night harassment units, in official communications, carefully avoiding any mention of gender. Luftwaffe High Command actively suppressed information, fearing widespread morale impact if troops learned the truth. Frontline soldiers' reactions differed markedly, grudging respect mixed with intensified fear. The nickname Nachthexen spread rapidly through forward units despite official discouragement. Some German formations began requesting dedicated anti-Night Witch resources, acknowledging the threat required specialized response. Others refused to acknowledge gender entirely, focusing exclusively on tactical problem while avoiding uncomfortable implications. Operational Order 4427, issued November 15, 1942, from Luftwaffe High Command. All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender characteristics. This directive issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale or provide material for enemy propaganda exploitation. While German command struggled with revelation's implications, Nadezhda Popova continued missions without pause. On November 12, 1942, she was flying her 341st mission, completely unaware Germans had discovered her regiment's composition days earlier. Her perspective on discovery, when she eventually learned Germans knew, reflected pragmatic focus. Whether enemy understood her gender made no operational difference to bomb loads or target destruction. By the time Germans confirmed her regiment's composition through multiple intelligence sources, she had already completed 362 of her eventual 852 missions, approaching halfway through a combat career that would span the entire remaining war. On November 18, 1942, 6 days after the formal Wehrmacht confirmation, she attacked a supply depot near Krimskaya, destroying fuel storage that forced German units to curtail operations for 3 days. "We didn't fly to prove women could fight," she explained years later. "We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs. They exploded the same regardless of who dropped them." The discovery changed nothing operationally. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners, standard procedure for documenting Eastern Front experiences. Between 1945 and 1946, thousands of interviews were conducted in prisoner camps across occupied Germany and the Soviet Union. When interrogators asked about night operations on the Eastern Front, unexpected consistency emerged in responses. Even hardened Waffen-SS officers showed visible reactions when night witches were mentioned. Patterns developed across hundreds of interviews, similar descriptions, identical frustrations, universal acknowledgement of effectiveness. Testimonies revealed psychological impact that transcended simple military assessment. Oberleutnant Martin Schroeder, Ju-88 pilot from Night Fighter Group 4, captured May 1945 near Prague, provided detailed testimony. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in autumn 1942. Command didn't specify they were female pilots. We only learned that detail after war's end through prison conversations. I attempted interception 17 times across 8 months. 17 failures. Every engagement followed identical pattern. The aircraft were too slow for effective engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I reduced speed to match theirs. It was professionally humiliating. You train for years mastering the Ju-88. You face British Lancaster bombers successfully. You understand air combat doctrine and practice. Then a wooden biplane from 1928 makes you appear incompetent. When I learned after surrender they were women, I had no adequate response. We couldn't intercept them because physics prevented it. Gender was operationally irrelevant. They had discovered how to weaponize our own aircraft's limitations against us." Hauptmann Ernst Weber, flak battery commander from Eastern Ukraine sector, captured January 1945. "My battery fired approximately 47,000 rounds at these aircraft between August 1942 and September 1943. We achieved perhaps 4 confirmed hits across 14 months. Standard engagement procedure failed consistently. They would approach with engines audible, we would prepare weapons and searchlights, then complete silence. We would fire at estimated positions, but we were shooting at phantoms. The engine sound would resume after bombs exploded. Psychological effect on my men was severe. Soldiers developed genuine fear of silent nights. Learning post-war they were women only intensified the sense that we had catastrophically underestimated this enemy's capabilities and innovation. Common themes emerged across testimonies without interrogators suggesting them. Consistent mention of silence and devastating psychological impact. Repeated descriptions of failed interceptions attributed specifically to speed differential. Almost universal shock upon learning gender, though many attempted rationalization. Soviet propaganda exaggerated female involvement, or surely most pilots were male with few female exceptions. Others admitted uncomfortable truth. Made no operational difference, they were effective regardless of gender. Variant phrases appeared repeatedly. We couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed. Physics defeated us more than enemy skill. The silence was worse than bombs. Several testimonies mentioned specific night witches by reputation or aircraft markings without knowing names. Widespread acknowledgement that propaganda about Soviet technical inferiority had been fundamentally wrong. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though usually without knowing her name at the time. Lieutenant Hans Dietrich, infantry officer from 23rd Panzer Division, captured April 1945. There was one aircraft we learned to recognize, had distinctive pattern of canvas repair patches on the upper wing and fuselage side. This aircraft appeared over our positions near Taman Peninsula perhaps 30 times between March and August 1943. We began calling it the Ghost with Patches, because it invariably arrived in absolute silence. I personally witnessed this aircraft's attacks 8 times. On April 2, 1943, it destroyed our ammunition depot with a perfectly placed bomb load. Chain reaction eliminated 17% of divisional ordnance. On June 14th, it hit our command post, killing 3 officers including our battalion commander. We never came close to shooting it down. After war's end, I examined Soviet military records during repatriation processing. That aircraft was almost certainly flown by Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova. Her records documented over 850 missions. I cannot comprehend that number. She was simply untouchable. Popova knew Germans were capturing and interrogating her comrades as the war progressed. Soviet intelligence regularly debriefed pilots on captured German documents that mentioned night witches. Her response to learning about prisoner testimonies reflected characteristic pragmatism, continued operations without modification. Her mission tempo never decreased during periods of German interrogations. By war's end in May 1945, she had completed 852 missions, including the legendary 18 sorties in one night that became documented both in Soviet decorations and in German testimonies from soldiers who experienced that particular bombardment. Her post-war reflection, recorded decades later, "We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us or feared us or were humiliated by us was their concern, not ours. Our concern was victory. We achieved it." The testimonies confirmed what Germans discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda exaggerations. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front. And Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible 4 years earlier. 852 combat missions. The number defies comprehension until placed in context. Most accomplished German night fighter pilots completed 40 to 60 missions across their entire careers before death, injury, or rotation. Popova flew 852. She flew continuously from May 1942 through May 1945, averaging approximately 28 missions per month for 36 consecutive months, never missing more than 3 nights except when weather grounded all aircraft. Total flight hours exceeded 1,700, calculated conservatively at 2 hours per mission including transit, approach, attack, and return. Total bombs dropped, approximately 170 tons, 40 kilograms per sortie multiplied across 852 missions. She survived the entire war without being shot down by fighters or catastrophic ground fire, though her aircraft absorbed hundreds of bullet holes across dozens of missions. The Soviet Union awarded her Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor, plus multiple orders of the Red Banner and Red Star. Her single-night record of 18 missions, achieved March 3, 1943, was never matched by any pilot in any Air Force during the entire war. That night alone, she flew 9 hours continuously, conducting complete mission cycles averaging 30 minutes each, including refueling and rearming. The physical toll was immense. Permanent hearing damage from engine noise, frostbite scars on her face and hands, from minus 40-degree open cockpit exposure, chronic exhaustion that took years to overcome. The psychological resilience required to fly 852 missions knowing each could be her last, watching 32 comrades die while she survived, represented burden few could imagine. Yet she continued without pause, night after night, bombing run after bombing run, choosing to climb back into that wooden cockpit when every rational calculation suggested her luck must eventually fail. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. United States Army Air Force rotated bomber crews home after 25 missions, recognizing that probability of survival decreased dramatically beyond that threshold. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty. Average Soviet bomber pilot flew 150 to 300 missions before death, injury, or war's end. She exceeded the high end by nearly 600%. Even among night witches, where the regiment average approached 500 to 600 missions, Popova exceeded her peers by 40 to 70%. Her 852 missions represented more combat sorties than some entire bomber groups accumulated collectively. Each mission averaged 2 hours yields 1,700 total flight hours. Each mission dropped 200 kilograms of bombs, yields 170,000 kilograms, 170 tons, of explosives delivered personally onto German positions. Conservative estimates of German casualties and material destroyed through her mission specifically: 300 to 500 personnel killed or wounded, dozens of ammunition dumps destroyed, hundreds of vehicles incinerated, countless supply disruptions and tactical delays. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to authorize all-female combat aviation units. The regiment flew approximately 23,000 combat sorties between May 1942 and May 1945, 3 years of continuous nightly operations without pause except weather. Total bombs dropped exceeded 3,000 tons. German casualties inflicted: estimated 5,000 personnel killed or wounded. Material destroyed: hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, countless installations and supply depots. Regiment casualties: 32 killed from approximately 80 personnel, representing 96.8% survival rate. Compare this to conventional Soviet bomber units suffering 40 to 60% losses. The cost-effectiveness validated asymmetric warfare principles. The entire regiment cost approximately $2 million to equip and maintain, yet inflicted damage worth over $50 million, while forcing Germans to expend 125 million Reichsmarks attempting to counter them. The cost ratio was staggering. Soviets spent 1, Germans spent 60 trying to stop them. 0 confirmed aerial kills of night witches by German fighters across 3 years and 23,000 sorties. Almost all 32 losses resulted from ground fire, not air combat. The cheapest aircraft combined with supposedly unsuitable pilots produced highest effectiveness per ruble invested in Soviet arsenal. But numbers alone don't capture strategic value beyond quantifiable metrics. Psychological warfare degraded German troop morale and inflicted chronic sleep deprivation across entire sectors. Resource diversion tied down over 5,000 German soldiers in air defense roles rather than frontline combat. Tactical disruption forced longer, more vulnerable supply routes to avoid night witch harassment zones. Propaganda value was incalculable. Proof that Soviet women could fight effectively boosted morale throughout the USSR while contradicting Nazi ideology. German miscalculation exposed fundamental flaws in intelligence assessment and doctrine development. The regiment demonstrated asymmetric warfare's potential, showing how irregular tactics could neutralize conventional superiority. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The night witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering advantages. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions embodied this principle completely. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to a world without nightly combat that had defined 3 years of her life. Initial recognition came swiftly. Hero of the Soviet Union medal presented personally, victory parades through Moscow, speeches celebrating Soviet women's contributions. But adjusting to civilian existence after flying 852 combat missions proved unexpectedly difficult. She continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor teaching the next generation of Soviet pilots, though peacetime flying felt hollow compared to the intensity she had known. She married a fellow pilot, started a family, attempted to build normal life. Yet she rarely spoke about her wartime experiences outside official contexts, finding that people who hadn't experienced combat couldn't comprehend what 852 missions meant. She maintained close relationships with surviving squadron members, women who understood without explanation. Soviet recognition during her lifetime fluctuated with political winds, celebrated when convenient for propaganda, occasionally forgotten when Stalin preferred other heroes. Multiple medals and honors accumulated across decades. Official accounts of her missions appeared in Soviet military histories, but recognition remained incomplete until later years. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West, dismissed as Soviet propaganda during Cold War tensions. Western military historians questioned whether women really flew combat missions or whether accounts exaggerated their role. The 1980s and Glasnost allowed more information to emerge from Soviet archives. During the 1990s and 2000s, Western historians finally gained access to German and Soviet records, discovering that testimonies from both sides validated each other perfectly. Books began appearing, documentaries brought the story to broader audiences, and recognition grew that this wasn't propaganda, but meticulously documented history. German testimonies proved particularly valuable, confirming Soviet accounts from the enemy's perspective. Modern recognition includes museums featuring their story at Russian Air Force Museum and other institutions, monuments and memorials across former Soviet territories, schools and streets named after regiment members. Films and documentaries continue introducing new generations to their achievements. Nadezhda Popova lived until July 8, 2013, dying at age 91, finally receiving the broader recognition her 852 missions deserved. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons about warfare, psychology, and human determination. Asymmetric tactics defeated technological superiority repeatedly. Wooden biplanes destroyed sophisticated German defenses, not through matching capabilities, but by exploiting physics and psychology Germans never anticipated. Sometimes psychological impact exceeds physical damage. Sleep deprivation and fear proved as valuable as destroyed supplies. Innovation matters more than resources. The silent gliding approach, using stall speed as defense, turning canvas construction into advantage, all demonstrated that tactical creativity defeats raw spending. Underestimating enemies creates fatal vulnerabilities. German assumptions about gender and aircraft primitiveness blinded them to genuine threat until costs became unsustainable. What seems like weakness often becomes strength when properly applied. Flying 852 missions required extraordinary resilience beyond physical skill. Each mission could have been her last, yet she continued. The physical toll was permanent, the psychological burden immense, but survival required skill, luck, and absolute refusal to quit. Sometimes the simplest design beats complex engineering. Canvas survived where metal would have failed. Manual controls worked when sophisticated systems would have broken. Understanding operational environment matters more than specifications. The stall speed paradox, silent approaches, rapid turnaround, all emerged from deep comprehension of what actually mattered versus what looked impressive on paper. The German officer who laughed at women in crop dusters on February 12, 1943, never understood what Nadezhda Popova and her sisters proved through 852 missions each. That courage doesn't require the best equipment. That skill can overcome raw power. That determination makes seemingly immutable physics irrelevant. Her 852 missions weren't merely impressive statistics, they were proof that Germans calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower, everything except the variable that mattered most: the will to fight. They built magnificent aircraft, trained elite pilots, deployed advanced technology, spent millions in resources. She flew a wooden biplane held together with canvas and wire, survived minus 40-degree cold in an open cockpit, dropped bombs by hand, navigated by stars. On paper, she should have died in her first mission. Instead, she flew 852, in wooden biplanes that shouldn't have worked, against an enemy that refused to take them seriously. The Night Witches proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the most powerful one. It's the one your enemy never sees coming, flying slower than physics should allow, silent as death itself.